divisions potentially. Welcome to Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football. I am one of the post-game hosts, Desmond. I am here with Mark Rogers. Before we dive in, would like to encourage you to please like and subscribe. Just a reminder. Also, share the video out on social media. We definitely appreciate it. It helps the channel, and we are pushing, trying to be the number one team channel in the Mark Rogers network, and also join Mark's Discord so you can join in on the chat that is going on, and also subscribe to the main channel, the Voice of College Football. So, Mark, how are we doing today?
Well, I will say, Desmond, as the mission is for you and for Dre too, and you've been the one that's put it out there to become the number one channel of our network on the Voice of College Football. That of course I have no preference. They're like children; they're all the same. I have no preference. But since Miami's out in front by probably 3,000 or so, that I'm rooting for you, because that'll just mean that I know they're on a pretty good steady pace of gaining subscribers. That if that happens, that Michigan overtakes the Miami channel, then that's just good news overall. So I'll take it.
Yeah, it is one of those things where, for me, I think with the channel, and I think Michigan obviously already has a huge fan base. So it's cool to see where we were about a year ago when myself and Dre first started to help out with the channel, and to see where we are today is pretty cool, pretty amazing. Obviously, you had a lot to do with that because Dre and I are here on a limited basis, but it's pretty cool. I think it's all in fun. The folks that you have on all of the other channels do an amazing job, do a phenomenal job, and obviously yourself as well. So with that, I know we have Steve Helwick, who will be joining us. He's got some things going on, but I believe he'll be joining us. So once he joins, we'll bring him on in, and we'll kind of dig into a little bit of Colorado State and Michigan. Excuse me.
It's that fresh air. It's that warm, those warm temperatures. You can't your lungs won't take that warm air.
I think it got up to 80 degrees or something like that today, and it's amazing. I'm loving it. I love the warm weather, and that 40 degrees we had was pretty brutal. So I'm loving this week so far. But one of the things we actually were talking about right before we jumped on was the potential for there is some committee or subcommittee talking about doing away with divisions with all of the Power Five conferences specifically. And we were just talking, and I had mentioned that I think doing that, number one, creates I don't know if fairness is the word, but creates a bit of fairness for all of the Power Five teams, to where at least to some scope and some area that you could say that those Power Five teams are equal. But the one of the beneficiaries I would look at would be Michigan, because when you're talking about the Big Ten East, it's a really, really tough division where you've got to play Ohio State every year, Penn State, Michigan State. And my just comment to you was, I don't think Michigan's road to Indianapolis could be any more difficult. So I feel like any change is going to benefit them. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I know that it's pretty easy to see, as any college football fan, Big Ten fan, looks at the divisions and says, okay, the East is better than the West, and it's always better than the West. And the East has won every Big Ten championship game. So this split came in 2014, so that's 14 through 21. That's 8 years, just as long as the playoffs been going on. The Big Ten East has won every division and every conference championship game, I should say. And so that must be Penn State 1, Michigan 1, Ohio State 6. Michigan State's got 1. So Michigan State, Penn State, Michigan each have 1. Ohio State got the other 5. Okay. Now, it might surprise some people when I've looked at the individual games that are won between the two divisions. It's pretty even. It was within 1 game last year. So what that tells me is that the divisions top to bottom, and I've looked at previous years, are pretty close when you put them all together, put everything together. That's because Rutgers has been so bad. Indiana was so horrible last year and all of that. And so there could be a case made to say, the divisions are fine, they're balanced. But those aren't the teams you're trying to get through to win a division championship. So all that's well and good that the West is so balanced, and that makes for a fun division. You don't know who's going to win, but it's the top is stacked in the Eastern Division. There's no question. So I do think it's going to be more fair, more equitable, create better conference championship games, which there have been some good ones. There have been some lousy ones last year and some other ones where, I'm sure Ohio State fans would not have minded a 1 versus 2 matchup in the conference last year because they would have played a rematch the next week, and who knows what would have happened. But I do think it's fair across the board, and they just need to. There's so many different ways the schedule could be devised in terms of having a format of a schedule. And I haven't vetted that through, thought that through, but I would like to see some attachment of rivals. I'm sure Ohio State and Michigan are going to play every year, and Michigan State are going to play every year. But then beyond that, come up with some kind of rotation. And then I would hope that there would be some kind of analytics to put together to make sure, because if it's not done right, you could have a situation where Michigan still always has to play Michigan State and Ohio State. So there's 2 tough games. And then if the rotation comes up in some kind of weighted way in the West, or what's the West now, which would just be teams, and they drew Wisconsin, Iowa, and you could have so there would have to be some kind of review of, and I've always been big on, much like the NFL, and every time I mention the NFL, they go crazy and they think I want to make college football like the NFL. No, I don't want to make college football like the NFL. Just using an example. The NFL is trying to create parity. I'm not trying to create parity. I'm trying to make it fair. But it can be looked at the same way, using the previous year's records to create balanced scheduling to a certain extent. So I would be all for that. But I would just want to maintain the rivalries and then go from there and create as balanced a scheduling situation as possible. But again, we've had situations where, of course, the best team in the conference is going to the title game, and then whether it's the second, the third, the fourth best team in the conference is going to the championship game, and that could, with automatic bids being talked about for the college football playoff coming out of the conferences, they want to guard against a fourth best team in the conference during the regular season having a good night in a conference title game and squeaking through.
Yeah, and that's actually exactly the next place I was going to go was with the, I would call it at this point, inevitable expansion of the college football playoff. I would think that, sticking with the Big Ten, you would want to have your best 2 teams playing for the conference championship, right? The number 1 and number 2 ranked team, because I would imagine that the loser of that game would still have a better shot of getting whatever is an at-large bid to make the playoff versus, maybe your, like you mentioned, the 4th best team just having a day and knocking out, your potential conference champion, and it just kind of muddying things up that way. But I would imagine that having, getting rid of the divisions and just having your best 2 teams play would probably be the best route to potentially get 2 teams in. But also, I haven't vetted that at all. It's just literally in conversation thinking about that.
And setting it up so you get that best team to get a bye week as well if there's an expansion to 12 teams. I've gone through 2014 through 21, taken that 12-team proposal that I know it was voted down, but I got to think that whatever's going to emerge eventually is going to be close to what was proposed. And I thought it was a pretty good format, and I'm usually not easily pleased. And I thought that they did a good job, even though I'm not into buys. I'll put that aside for a second. I thought that they thought that through, and it made a lot of it made a whole lot of sense. And I did put it through the playoff seasons, and the Big Ten would be pretty safe in putting in three teams. I'd have to go back and see what I put together, but um, you can imagine the SEC would put in the most teams pretty consistently, and the Big Ten would be right there in putting. And it's great news for the teams that have missed the playoffs consistently, but some Penn State teams that have gone 11-2 and gone to major bowl games in terms of getting in. So it would be interesting, and I think it would open up a lot of fan bases to being a little bit more excited in November football of that next tier.
Yeah, because it as it stands today, two losses and you are absolutely out of it. So that's that's just where the standard is today. But yeah, I can imagine the Big Ten definitely benefiting from that expanded playoff. And I also would think, I believe Wisconsin's had a couple years where they ended up at like 5 or in that kind of top 10, top 12 when it comes to the final rankings, but just not able to, to make it to that 4 spot. I think there was a year where they had, didn't they? I think they either played in the conference championship or it was something where they were very close with, I want to say Alabama, but for that 4 to 5 spot, and Alabama ended up getting in, and Wisconsin just missed it with, I think, 1 loss. So it was tough and difficult, but
Your Alabama team in 2017, that was the year.
Yep.
So credit Alabama. Whether there's an argument whether they should have been in the playoff, but they got there. They made it happen. They won the games, won the national championship fair and square, only lost 1 game in the regular season. So from a record standpoint, it's not like it was crazy that they were in the playoff, but of course they lost to Auburn, didn't make the conference championship game. Yeah, Wisconsin was 12-0 in the regular season, and then they lost to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. So had they won that game,
they're in.
They would have been in the playoff, and Alabama would have missed.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be interesting with the Big Ten. I think, like I said, doing away with the divisions. The toughest part with that is, like you mentioned, having that next season, having as much fairness as you can with the schedule, because there's a part of it, even with, you take the standings and however you want to do it. Let's say the number 1 team, you're going to play number 6, next year. Well, if number 6 is losing, a lot of guys or has a really big, a highly rated incoming recruiting class, that could also skew things as well. And, for the number 1 team, well, we're losing our Trevor Lawrence or our Justin Fields. Well, that, I think it will be a difficult process. I don't envy whoever's got to make that decision, but I'm sure they get paid a lot of money. So maybe I don't envy them, but I think that would be the tough part of trying to create the fairness, because you could make an argument if whatever, as Michigan, well, it's the first year after JJ McCarthy and we don't really have that next 5-star kid, and now we're being treated as if we are the best team in the conference, and you know what I mean, that may not be the case the following year because someone's graduating or moving on. So that part would be difficult, I think, to bring into play with the schedule making as well.
Well, with the way it stands right now, there's no human intervention in the schedule. It's just
true.
It's just a format, and it just rolls out. To your point, which is an interesting one, I kind of, for as much as I'm against committees, I would think about, okay, what I served up there and then you took on was, yes, the numbers don't completely produce a fair schedule. Truth be known, you can't produce a fair schedule because you don't know how good the teams are going to be until the season plays. So we're talking about what projects to be as fair a schedule as possible.
Yep.
You don't know. But to your point, there could be metrics. I could see a situation where you build a schedule that tries to create a 500 composite schedule for everybody from the previous season, but you do have knowledgeable football people look at it and say, are there some outliers here? Like Michigan State comes to mind in 2016. They had just gone to the playoff, then they just cratered at 3-9. Somebody looking at that and saying, we're not going to treat Michigan State like a 3-9 team. We know they should bounce back. They did. They went 10-3 the next year. And so maybe massaging the numbers a little bit with some common sense and looking over the things you're talking about.
Yeah. And maybe it's a production thing that you look at. Like you mentioned Michigan State, and I just for thinking about that, the last year's team that they had with Kenneth Walker, maybe you look at the production that's exiting, whether it's, and maybe you penalize them a little more for transfer portal where, you don't take it into account as much. But nonetheless, Kenneth Walker the third is gone, and he was a, 1,600-yard rusher. So you're talking I would imagine at least 60 to 70% of their rush yards as a team. So maybe that's the way that you look at it. Where you factor in, number one, the schedule, but also some of that leaving production, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, whatever the case may be, and maybe that's something that also factors into it as well.
I don't think that's going to happen, though. I really don't. I think they're going to just have a cookie cutter template that they're going to build. And I just don't want to see made up rivalries or common opponents that have to be. So for example, right now, and you're familiar with this, in the SEC, you play everyone in your division, you play two teams from the other division, and one of the two is a rival, and you play them every year. The other one rotates through the other 6 teams. Well, some of those rivalries are legit. So I am all for Alabama playing Tennessee every year. Auburn and Georgia, it's the South's oldest rivalry, playing every year. But I don't get why everyone has to have a designated rival. Just because there are some legit, why do Texas A&M and South Carolina have to play every year? I can't think of 2 teams that have less to do with each other in the SEC than those. I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
You would actually create more scheduling flexibility if you would only adhere to those rivalries that are legit, and then you would have more flexibility to create a fair schedule with and the ACC does the same thing. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't want the Big Ten to get into that. I do think every team should be reviewed to say, okay, Michigan, who are teams that Michigan should play every year? Okay, Ohio State, Michigan State. I don't think there's any question. Those two, some people would argue that are into all the trophy rivalries, and I've got no issue with this, but some people would say Minnesota. That's a old Michigan-Minnesota rivalry, but they broke that up when they split divisions, so they didn't have any issues doing it then. I don't think that they need to play every year, but again, that's just me. But kind of reviewing every team and saying, okay, we're going to make designated opponents based on rivalries, and then we're going to leave ourselves flexibility throughout the rest of the schedule.
Yeah, I think I think the more flexibility you have, the better. It's like I said, especially if we're talking, we are looking to make this change to make it more fair. Like, because someone had mentioned in the chat, Tennessee gets it bad. Like, yeah, they do, just because they're, you've got your crossover games, Alabama, then you also have Georgia in your division, you have Florida in your division. Like that is it's a gauntlet.
And when you're in the East in the SEC and you're playing the West, the team that comes up as the other team, in addition to Alabama, is not going to be any easy draw either. And sometimes that one's brutal too. Like if you just so happen to draw Auburn when they're really good, or LSU when they're really good, and it's like, okay, that's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Ole Miss, they get Vandy every year. That's why.
Yes, it's unique. It's very unique.
The ACC does the same thing, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
some of them make sense. And again, North Carolina State, great, play every year. Yeah, they're in separate divisions. Florida State, Miami, great rivalry. They got to play every year. I don't know why they have to do that with everyone. Doesn't
Right.
make any sense to me.
Well, Ed Rogers, who tunes in quite a bit, so I see him all the
Yep.
time. Thanks for your comment, Ed. But he says it's a stupid idea that won't work. I mean, the Big 12 made this transition, and I want to say it was after the first college football playoff. I believe they got rid of their divisions because they, I don't know if it saw the writing on the wall or just essentially just had a team left out, and they did not want to have that again. If I'm recalling things correctly, but they did away with the divisions, and I think it's worked for the Big 12. I mean, they've still had some years that they've missed, but I think I think it can work. I think it definitely can work. It's got to be done correctly, though.
So the Big 12 lost Nebraska, Missouri, Texas A&M, Colorado. This was in around 2010.
Hmm.
And so that's when they ditched the divisions,
Okay.
but they also ditched their championship game. They didn't have a
That's what it
championship
was.
game
Yep.
for about 7 years.
Yep.
So then they just played out their season. They only had 10 teams, so they went to a 9-game conference schedule. So the one thing I like about that is there's no argument about fairness in the sky. Everybody plays everybody, so that's
Hmm.
fair. And then what they had was that first playoff year in 2014 is they had an issue because Baylor and TCU tied for the conference championship and they didn't have a conference champion,
Yep.
an outright winner. So that kind of screwed them. And then when they brought the championship game back in 2017, they decided to go with what everybody else is talking about right now.
Yep. For sure. Well, let's switch gears. We've got Steve Helwick who is hopping on. So, Steve, welcome to Michigan football, the voice of college football. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent right now, and just getting excited talking about college football again and looking at these games on the radar.
Yeah, you can't beat it, and it's we're getting close. We're getting close. So, thanks again for joining us, Steve. And wanted to just talk a little bit about Colorado State. Obviously, that's Michigan's opening game. Colorado State will be traveling to the Big House, and I think if you just took a look at the record the way that I did, you would think that they're 3-9, they had an awful season, so on and so forth. But when I started taking a look at some of those box scores, I mean, they had I think they played Iowa, lost by 10 points, on the road. They lost to Hawaii by 5, so some pretty close games within there. So do you feel like Colorado State is that 3-9 can be misleading and they're kind of on the way up, or is it they're a bit concerned about how this next season's going to be? Like, where do you feel like they would be in their feeling of this next season?
Well, first, I'm going to recap what the 2021 season was, because that was just a roller coaster of a season for Colorado State. They came out, they got punched in the gut by an FCS team in South Dakota State, a good FCS team, but it's unacceptable to lose in Fort Collins by 19 points to South Dakota State. And then the next week, they played another team that got punched in the gut by an FCS team in Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt came off that loss to ETSU. And Colorado State lost that game in Fort Collins on a game-winning field goal by the Commodores. So an 0-2 start, and Colorado State's looking like one of the 5 worst teams in the country. And then they have a really impressive 4-game stretch that probably couldn't have gone better in late September and mid-October, where they beat Toledo in one of the weirdest games of the season, where I think they went 11 of 28 passing that game, and their only touchdown was a punt return touchdown. They had 5 field goals, and they just stifled Toledo's offense and won 22-6. Huge upset. Toledo usually blows a game like that every single year where they're considerable favorites. But then Colorado State continues that momentum in Kinnick next week, and they come within 10 points of Iowa. They led at halftime in that game. They were the first team to really expose Iowa's offense last year. It was a ton of backfield pressure. Colorado State finished top 10 in sacks per game last year. And Scott Patchen, their top defensive end, he was All Mountain West honors, just signed to deal with the Colts as an undrafted free agent. So they'll need to reload some of that pass rush this year. But their pass rush looked good against Iowa last year. and then they blow out San Jose State, New Mexico. So they're 3-3. It looks like a team that's really improving around midseason. And then disaster strikes on a Friday night in Logan against Utah State, where I think they had the worst clock management I saw of any team last season, where they had time to spike it, and they were lining up for a game-winning field goal on that Friday night game. And instead of spiking it, they just rushed out the field goal unit and tried to attempt a field goal, just rushed with the clock going down instead of spiking the ball, and they shanked it just because they weren't prepared. And that loss just it just bled into one loss and then to another loss. The next week they blow a big lead to Boise State at halftime, and then they just get worse and worse as the season progresses, and it ends in a 52-10 loss to Nevada. Now, the 2022 team is completely different than this 2021 team, because after that loss to Nevada, Nevada coach Jay Norvell, after beating Colorado State 52-10, goes to Colorado State, goes across the conference, switches jobs, and now this entire team is different because this is like USC in terms of the transfer portal. This team is just completely transfers all across the board starting. A lot of them are from Nevada too. So we should expect a lot of different things from this Colorado State team, because the 2021 team, it's not here anymore. I'd say there's about as many maybe more transfers that are projected starters this year than starters from last year. That's how different Colorado State's going to look for 2022. So they're a wild card team, new coach, a lot of transfers. So I really don't know how this game's going to go to start. I mean, obviously, you'd think that Michigan would blow them out. Michigan beat a few good teams in non-conference play last year handily, like Western Michigan and Northern Illinois. That's what I would expect to happen. But Colorado State is a transformed team.
Nice. It'll be interesting. I think Michigan is in a different spot than they've been recently under Jim Harbaugh. Like they have always had success, but it's never been to the level that they've had last season. So now the challenge is going to be for Jim Harbaugh and the captains and the team leaders to be able to sustain that. And we talked last week about it, but just being the hunted, it's a very different experience versus being the hunter. So now, Michigan will have that target on their backs. And I think, so to speak, they've always had that just because of, the Michigan allure, just such a big brand and program. But I think it'll be to a different level this year of, you're the returning Big Ten, defending Big Ten champions, and you made it to the college football playoff. I mean, every team and every player is going to want to have their big game against Michigan. So it'll be a new experience for them to be able to just navigate that as a team, and to just kind of be in uncharted territory, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited to watch the return of Ronnie Bell to the lineup this year for Michigan, because he got hurt on that spectacular catch against Western Michigan. I think he basically did 2 plays last year. He had a great punt return and a spectacular touchdown catch, and then you want to see more, and then he's out for the season. So I think just the addition of Ronnie Bell to that Michigan receiving core, where you already have Cornelius returning and you have Eric All at tight end, I really like this Michigan receiving core, and I think this is the best I felt about it since probably when they had Mario Manningham and Adrian Arrington.
Yeah, they definitely have the potential to be a really good group, like really, really good group. And yeah, I think Ronnie Bell is going to be, I think, the glue for that receiving core to make sure that, he's going to be the star. I think he's going to be the constant, the consistent, performer week in and week out. He's going to be that guy you can count on for 8 to 10 catches, maybe, 12 some weeks. Just a really explosive player, someone who can really draw a lot of attention. Whereas I think that'll help guys like Cornelius to really, to be singled up a little more, get a little less attention. Where Ronnie, I think, will be able to take a lot of that on. But I still go back because even, kind of the first couple games of the season last year, I was one who wanted them to throw the ball more. I felt like they were playing these teams where the margin of error is really big. So let's make sure we get our quarterback set and, get him a lot of reps, a lot of experience. And Josh Gaddis and Jim Harbaugh were having none of that. And I was wrong, because Michigan was able to beat Ohio State and things like that. So my thought is going to be that we're probably not going to see a lot of Ronnie Bell and Cornelius Johnson in this game. I think we're going to see Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, I think it's going to be a pretty run heavy game plan, just because that seemingly that's what Jim Harbaugh, that's just been his DNA and what he his track record has been here at Michigan, and even with San Francisco as well.
Steve, there's one question here in the chat about the Colorado State quarterback situation. Do we know who the Rams are going with?
They brought in Clay Millen from Nevada, who was Carson Strong's backup last year. Really didn't play much just because Carson Strong was very durable, didn't miss time. And Clay Millen did check in last year when Nevada beat Colorado State 52-10. So he was on the other side of that matchup, and he's following Jay Norvell to Colorado State. So we don't know too much about him. He was a 4-star quarterback from 24/7 Sports, according to their recruiting. Pocket passer type quarterback, it appears. And so it's pretty much like throwing out a true freshman, it feels like, just with the amount of experience he's had in his career. Their previous quarterback, Todd Centeio, transferred to James Madison, who is our newest FBS program.
Okay. I saw that, he was the starting quarterback last year. There was a receiver that I wanted to mention, Dante Wright. Is that correct? Let's see. Yes, wide receiver.
22.
Yeah, he's not a very big guy, but he was pretty productive last year for Colorado State, and I'm assuming that role will probably even grow with Trey McBride, moving on to the NFL. I was looking at the receiving leaders in each game, and I think every single game except for like 2 or 3, it was Trey McBride was the leading receiver. So he seemed to get a volume of all of those, targets and catches, which deservedly so. He's an NFL player. But what are your thoughts on, Dante Wright, and just kind of what we can expect to see from him, as far as throughout the season for Colorado State?
Yeah, Dante Wright was a really electrifying player, especially when he first came on campus. In that 2019 season, back when they had Patrick O'Brien at quarterback and Mike Bobo at head coach, they really utilized him kind of in a Dexter McCluster type role, if you remember him at Ole Miss, where he was kind of a hybrid running back receiver, and he was a frequent rushing option for the team, and that really didn't persist into the Adazio era. I'm looking at his stats. Yeah, he had 214 rushing yards in his freshman season on top of a career-high 805 receiving yards. He's 5'9", really fast guy. He's definitely a playmaker in that regard, and he also held punt return duties that year. So I think you saw Dante Wright at his peak as a freshman, and he has kind of not been able to put up the same number since. But you're hoping a guy like Jay Norvell, who really worked with some star receivers like Romeo Doubs at Nevada, can really get him back into the offense. I also think that they lose some of their receivers from last year, but they also get Melquan Stovall from Nevada, who was a good secondary receiver for the Wolfpack next year. And I think that Stovall's game serves as a really good complement to Dante Wright's game. He's another small, fast receiver at 5'8" that they have there.
Okay, perfect. Well, it'll be an interesting one. I know Michigan fans are really excited, as they should be. Coming off of an amazing year, and one that you look back at it and just turn by turn and week by week, it was just improving, getting better, and kind of stacking wins is kind of the thing that I kept mentioning. But as far as heights, like, what do you think Michigan potentially could do this year, with Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy both coming back, and just the weapons that they have? What do you think their ceiling could be this year?
Well, the ceiling would be the college football playoff again. I like the returning pieces on offense. I know Cade McNamara was probably the biggest question with the offense, but usually you see a lot of development in a quarterback from year 2 to year 3, especially. I'm thinking of some quarterbacks across the nation last year, like Clayton Tune in Houston. He's someone who McNamara kind of reminded me of his first few years at Michigan, and Clayton Tune really made that jump, and you saw how the Houston Cougars improved last year. I think if McNamara can make that jump, he has a great receiving core. Blake Corum was a Heisman candidate after the first 3 weeks last year, the way he was running the football. But defensively, they have a lot of guys that they have to they have to replace. Aiden Hutchinson being a big one, Dax Hill in there. I think the best player on this defense is probably Junior Colson at this point, who had a spectacular freshman campaign as just a good run stopper for this Michigan team. So I think this team could compete for a Big Ten title. That Ohio State offense is certainly looking scary, and I'm going to pick Ohio State to win it. But in terms of who I think the second best Big Ten team is right now, it's probably between Michigan and Wisconsin, and I'd probably give the edge to the Wolverines right now, considering how they played last season.
Yeah, it'll be. I think everybody's going to be circling that game in late November with Ohio State and Michigan. It'll be an interesting one. But I think even too coming into this year, if you made me call that game before the season started, like I probably would have picked Ohio State as well. So that's the great thing about football is you just never know. But Steve, as far as for yourself, do you have a favorite team or anything like that you follow, or is it just college football overall in general?
I follow all 130. I guess it'll be 131 once I learn more about James Madison coming to the Sun Belt here. I did grow up a diehard Penn State fan, though. That's where my parents went. I used to go to the games, the whiteouts there. So that was always fun. And now I'm based in Houston, so I'm usually at Rice and Houston games. I also went to college at University of Texas, so another big program there with the Longhorns that gets a lot of media attention and hype. Michigan finally lived up to their hype last year. Actually, last year, I think they were preseason unranked because of how bad they were in the pandemic season. I remember saying after that Western Michigan game, and especially the NIU game, I said, this team for once is really underhyped, and this is going to be a great team, because I knew how good Western Michigan's offense was with Caleb Ellaby, and I saw what Michigan was able to do to that in week one, and I saw how Michigan took it to the MAC champs and NIU by putting up 63 points and 9 straight possessions on them. So I thought Michigan last year seemed underhyped at the beginning of the year, and they really exceeded it. So that was a really impressive job by Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines, bouncing back from that 2020 pandemic season.
Yeah, and I think sometimes with the Michigan team is they have the confidence, and I think some years it kind of borders on the arrogance, and really you can look at the leaders of the team for that. Like I was the one that looked at a guy like Rashawn Gary, who was immensely talented, but you didn't see the production on the field versus a guy like Aiden Hutchinson. And I felt like having that coming into the season unranked, I think gave them that chip on the shoulder. The leaders on the team were just the type of just work hard guys. Like, we're not here to talk. You didn't see a lot of those guys in front of microphones, things like that. It was just we're a team. We're just gonna come in, work, put our heads down, and do what we need to do, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. So, I believe that is it for us this week. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We definitely appreciate it. Hopefully we can have you back on again. We'd love to chat with you a little more about Michigan and just whatever you like to talk with, and we definitely appreciate it. So thanks so much, man, for joining us. We appreciate it. Mark, as always, thanks so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Please, another reminder to like and subscribe to not only the Michigan Football Channel, but also Mark's main channel, The Voice of College Football. And that is it for us. We will see you next week, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time sharp. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.